Iowa Realtors, Greta Haas, Director of Government Affairs, here with our General Counsel, Justin Hayes. And we are going to jump into a hot topic today, seller disclosures. Let's jump right into it.
Let's do it.
So, under 558A, the code section that governs seller disclosures, let's talk a little bit about what's required under the code.
Yeah, so the seller's disclosure is required to be given by the seller or their agent on behalf of any seller upon making an offer or the presentation of an offer. It's very clear. You have to make the disclosure at that time. Now, also, the seller's disclosure just generally goes over the condition of the property. It's required for residential properties, and by that we mean those properties with 1 to 4 dwellings, right? So the rule for seller's disclosures is actually laid out pretty clearly in 558A and also in the administrative rules.
Now, we know there are some exemptions to properties that are not required to have a seller disclosure. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely, and there are actually a number of exemptions. The ones I see asked about most frequently are situations where you've got joint tenants, situations where you've got a transfer between family members, situations where there's an entity that's doing the conveyance, so it's a conservatorship, it's a trust, and also situations where there's a transfer by a power of attorney. So, but there are plenty more.
That makes sense. So we also run the Pro Standards program here, and a lot of times the complaints we see come in on Article 2, right, dealing with
100%.
disclosure. So what are some of those issues that you can potentially run into when dealing with a seller disclosure and kind of how to remediate those?
Yeah, definitely. So from the seller standpoint, and this is not necessarily code of ethics, but just from the seller standpoint, right, it's about not filling out that disclosure completely and honestly. And from the realtor standpoint, it's where they have knowledge of a problem that they don't disclose themselves. That's where you start to get into Article 1 and Article 2 trouble.
Awesome. So let's talk about what happens if a seller never lived on the property that they're selling. What are their obligations?
Yeah.
For seller disclosure?
You know, that's actually a common misconception, right? So I hear from time to time from realtors who say, well, the seller never lived on the property, so they don't have to complete a disclosure, right? That is inaccurate. That is false. The seller still has to complete that disclosure. Everything can be unknown, but the seller still has to fill out a disclosure form. Get that done.
Absolutely. So for our members, our real estate licensees, and our brokers, what is best practice in their duty under 558A and to their clients and the public with seller disclosures?
Yeah, and honestly, I think this spans a couple of different topics. The first one would be to educate the client. Educate the client about the importance of the disclosure, educate the client about the importance of completing the disclosure and doing so honestly, right? Also, you want to document your efforts to educate the client. Keep that in your folder because if there are issues down the line, that's going to help you out. Now, you want to err on the side of disclosure. If your seller is telling you, I'm not sure if I should disclose this thing, right? First, ask them if it's something they would want to know if they were buying the property. But second, the advice should be disclose, disclose, disclose. So keep that in mind. Ensure that the client knows that the seller's disclosure is not the place to speculate about the future. Indicate those things on the disclosure that you know to be true, right? Be honest about it. And then the last thing here is the seller definitely has an obligation, and we've seen cases under Iowa law that stand for this proposition, that even if the seller doesn't know about the extent of a problem, their knowledge of a problem is enough to implicate that a disclosure requirement. So you may not know how bad the problem is, but if you know that there's a problem, disclose it. Be done.
Exactly, perfect. Yeah, and I think that sums it up well. When in doubt, always err on the side of disclosure.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Justin.
Thank you.